Here we go, Black and Gold Nation, right from the heart of Pittsburgh, where every win becomes a bar argument and every loss turns into a citywide debate. The topic of the week has set the South Side on fire once again, Mike Tomlin. After everything we heard inside the team facility, and after Ian Rappaport's direct, no-nonsense report, one thing is crystal clear: a firing is not happening this year, especially after the win over the Baltimore Ravens. And whether you love that news or absolutely hate it, the organization's stance is firm. Rappaport highlighted Tomlin's strong relationship with Art Rooney, the stability he's provided since 2007, and of course, the extension signed in June. But he pointed to the detail that changes everything: the 2027 team option, which must be decided by March 1st. That single decision could define the next chapter of this franchise, because it determines whether Tomlin enters 2026 fully secured or as a lame duck coach fighting for a new deal. And you know this organization doesn't let a head coach walk into a contract year unless they're sending a very clear message. But before we do, smash that like button, because if you're black and gold till the end, this video is for you. What makes this even more interesting is the candor Tomlin himself shared at the podium today, especially after what was an emotional and chaotic week surrounding this team. We heard injury updates, explanations for roster decisions, and the kind of subtle messaging Tomlin gives when he wants the team to understand something without outright saying it. But before getting into all those details, we can't ignore the reaction across the fan base. Some supporters, even ones who would bleed black and gold before anything else, feel like the standard has slipped. They see the non-losing seasons, they understand the consistency, but they also remember a time when this team struck fear across the league. And that's exactly the tension we're seeing now: stability versus expectations. That's why James Harrison's comments hit as hard as they did. Hearing a former Defensive Player of the Year, a franchise icon, argue that only a Super Bowl should guarantee Tomlin's job, that rattled a lot of people. His point wasn't emotional, it was rooted in numbers, trends, and the idea that the team has been stuck in the exact same pattern for too long. Whether you agree or not, it's the kind of commentary that forces a real conversation. But it's also fair to look at the other side, because Harrison's take, while powerful, is extreme when applied literally. Firing a coach after reaching an AFC championship game? Moving on from someone after multiple playoff wins? That's not how this organization operates, and truthfully, that's not how any stable franchise survives long-term in the NFL. Mike Tomlin is respected for a reason. He's built a culture players repeatedly buy into. He's weathered roster transitions few coaches could handle cleanly. And if this team finishes strong, if they punch that playoff ticket and possibly win a postseason game, the argument for his return isn't just organizational loyalty, it's performance-based. But the flip side is unavoidable. If they collapse down the stretch, if they lose out and waste the momentum they worked so hard to build, that's when the front office could seriously consider declining the option for 2027. Not a firing, not a public breakup, just a quiet message that the pressure is officially on. Tomlin's commitment to Pittsburgh is undeniable. His family is here, he loves the city, and he has strong personal ties that make the idea of leaving on his own terms extremely unlikely. So the end of this journey, if it ever truly comes, won't be because Tomlin walks away. It'll be because the franchise decides the reset button is necessary, and we're not there yet. Not even close, based on what we heard today. And with Cam Hayward nearing what might be his final season, Tomlin absolutely wants to be a part of that chapter. But the tension doesn't stop there, because Tomlin also addressed the Roman Wilson situation, and that explanation raised eyebrows all across the fan base. Roman being benched because Scotty Miller offers more value as a backup punt returner? That answer didn't sit well, especially considering Roman's flashes of growth, his efficiency, and his ability to win downfield. Watching a young receiver who showed promise suddenly lose his helmet on game day stirred concerns about trust, development, and whether the coaching staff sees a long-term future with him. And if we're being honest, fans have every right to question that decision. Roman's still learning the nuances of the position, the option route timing, the technique demanded in this offense, but he also has traits that matter. That's why it's concerning that he may not get another opportunity unless injuries hit the room. So here's where I want to bring you, the fans, directly into this discussion as we wrap up the first half of this breakdown. With everything you just heard, the reports on Tomlin, the comments from James Harrison, the explanation for Roman Wilson's benching, the injury updates, and the overall state of this team heading into Week 15, the question becomes unavoidable, and I want your honest reaction before we move into the second part of this story. How far does Mike Tomlin need to take this team in the postseason for you to feel confident that he should remain the head coach moving forward? Picking up right where we left off, the ripple effects of Tomlin's decisions and the organization's long-term outlook stretch far beyond one press conference. And the second half of this story digs even deeper into what those updates mean for the immediate battle this team faces. When Tomlin talked through the injury situation, it painted a picture of a roster that's battered but still pushing forward. DK Metcalf dealing with stomach issues so severe that he stayed overnight in a Baltimore hospital wasn't something anyone expected, especially not after a performance where he cracked 140 yards and looked every bit like the explosive WR1 this offense needs. Hearing that he's expected to play against Miami brings relief, but it also highlights just how thin the margin for error has become. This team can't afford to lose offensive firepower, not against the Dolphins squad that thrives on turning games into track meets. And when you stack DK's situation next to Kyle Duggar battling a hand injury, the concussion protocol cases with Darnell Washington, Malik Harrison, and Andrew Peat, and the offensive line shuffling that never seems to stop, you see exactly why this week feels so significant. Broderick Jones still being out turns the spotlight directly back on the left tackle position, and while Dylan Cook held up decently in emergency duty, a full game against Bradley Chubb and Chop Robinson is a completely different challenge. It's the kind of assignment that can shake an entire offensive game plan if not handled correctly. Every one of these players becomes a domino. If Washington misses time, the run game and the heavy formations lose a critical piece. If Harrison can't go, the defense loses one of its most important run supporters just as it faces Devon Achane. If Pete can't clear protocol, the line becomes vulnerable on the blind side of a quarterback who's already taken enough hits behind makeshift protection. This isn't small stuff, it's structural. That's why the Roman Wilson benching stands out even more. When a roster is thin, when injuries hit multiple phases of the team, and when games matter more with every passing week, depth becomes the difference between competing and collapsing. Hearing Tomlin essentially say that Roman's helmet went to Scotty Miller because of punt return responsibilities didn't just confuse fans, it revealed something about where the coaching staff stands on Roman's readiness. It wasn't about talent. It wasn't about production. It was about trust. And trust, in this offense, is tied directly to mastering the nuances of option routes and quarterback-friendly angles. Roman has the athletic traits. He showed flashes, but in this system, flashes don't matter if the staff believes the details aren't there yet. That's why Adam Thielen was brought in. Precision, reliability, and route intelligence that's been refined for a decade. But fans have every right to push back, because benching a young, ascending receiver in favor of a depth returner feels like the exact opposite of building toward the future. It feels like protecting the floor instead of trying to raise the ceiling. Still, the broader context of today reveals a coaching staff that's trying to survive the moment while simultaneously stabilizing a team that's endured more turbulence than most people realize. And sometimes, those decisions, from personnel to playtime to practice reps, reflect that pressure more than anything else. Whether they're the right decisions, well, that's where the debate lies, and that brings us to the final storyline from the file that might matter more than Steelers fans realize, the situation unfolding in Cleveland. Hearing that the Browns are prepared to give Deshaun Watson another shot at being their starting quarterback in 2026 felt like a gift wrapped in brown and orange. Watson has been among the worst quarterbacks in football during his last 2 active seasons, and now he's returning from not 1 but 2 Achilles tears. On top of that, the organization appears dangerously close to convincing itself that Shatter Sanders could be the long-term solution. And for Steelers fans, that's the best-case scenario. 2 quarterbacks with limited ceilings battling for control of a franchise that has a history of instability? That's exactly the kind of rival Pittsburgh wants in the division. A Cleveland team passing on drafting a quarterback early in 2026 opens the door for the Steelers to move up, reshape their future, and avoid competing in a division where all 3 rivals are stacked at the most important position. Whether Cleveland realizes it or not, they may be building a perfect storm of mediocrity, one that could benefit Pittsburgh for years. So with everything laid out, the Tomlin debates, the roster decisions, the injury concerns, the future of Roman Wilson, and even the situation brewing in Cleveland, the truth is that the season's final stretch feels heavier than at any point so far. The margin for error is shrinking. The pressure is rising. And every decision, every snap, every health update, every lineup change matters more now than it did in September or October. Fans know it. The players know it. Tomlin knows it. And that brings us to the close of this second half of the story. If you're still here, if you're still locked in, then you're exactly the type of fan this team leans on when the noise gets loud. Before this video ends, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and stick around. The next video is already waiting for you on the screen. Picking up the storyline exactly where it left off, still inside this same narrative flow and without resetting the tone. The picture around this Steelers team becomes even clearer when you step back and look at how all these threads tie together. What we're seeing now is a franchise standing on a razor's edge, one where every internal decision carries weight far beyond a single game week. And that's why this moment, this stretch of the season, feels so defining, not only for Tomlin, not only for the roster, but for the entire direction the organization is preparing to take as March 1st approaches. Because here's the deeper truth hidden beneath all the surface-level discussions. The Steelers are no longer simply reacting to injuries, depth issues, or short-term roster adjustments. They're evaluating the infrastructure of their own program. The decision to bench Roman Wilson wasn't isolated. The insistence on keeping Scotty Miller active wasn't random. The emphasis on option route precision, detail-oriented execution, and quarterback-friendly spacing speaks to a coaching staff that feels the urgency of the moment. They aren't coaching for September anymore. They're coaching for their jobs, their reputations, and the perception of whether this offense, and by extension, the organization, has a future that aligns with the modern NFL. And that's where the growing frustration from the fan base stems from. Fans aren't angry because the team lacks talent. They're angry because the talent is there, but the development feels stuck. They saw Roman Wilson stacking defensive backs vertically just weeks ago, winning downfield, flashing the traits of a young receiver who could become a long-term piece. They saw the route running progression. They saw the chemistry beginning to form. So when he suddenly loses his helmet on a game day while a veteran with a minimal offensive role stays active, it raises the same question fans have asked for years. Is this staff maximizing its young talent, or playing it safe to avoid mistakes? All of this is happening while other teams around the league, some in the division, embrace growth, adapt aggressively, and build systems around their younger players. And that's the contrast that makes every decision in Pittsburgh feel amplified. It's not just whether Roman Wilson gets a helmet. It's what that decision represents. It's not just whether DK Metcalf plays through a stomach issue. It's what it reveals about how thin the Steelers' margin has become at key offensive positions. It's not just whether Andrew Peat clears concussion protocol. It's what happens to the entire structure of the offense if he doesn't. And the truth is, all of these moving parts funnel toward one central point. The Steelers don't have the luxury of getting these decisions wrong anymore. Not with the AFC tightening. Not with 3 division rivals that can put up points instantly. Not with the playoffs on the line. And certainly not with the March 1st deadline looming in the background, quietly reminding the franchise that the future of the head coach hangs in the balance of how the next few weeks unfold. Even the situation in Cleveland, as messy and misguided as it may be, affects Pittsburgh's roadmap. If the Browns truly believe that Deshaun Watson or Shatter Sanders represents their long-term answer at quarterback, that opens a door the Steelers can walk right through. They could trade up. They could reshape the offense. They could build a system around a young quarterback whose ceiling hasn't been capped by years of poor development or physical decline. The decisions of division rivals don't just shape their own trajectory, they shape Pittsburgh's opportunities. So now, as the Steelers gear up for the Dolphins, as Tomlin sets the tone for what could become the defining stretch of his recent tenure, and as injuries slowly tighten around the roster like a vice, the fan base finds itself at a crossroads too. There's hope, there's frustration, there's pride, there's impatience, and all of it exists simultaneously because fans know exactly what this team is capable of, and exactly how often it falls short of that capability. And that brings us to the next part of this unfolding story, the one that will determine whether this late-season run becomes a turning point or another footnote in a series of almost seasons. Before we jump into that next layer, I want to know from you, do you believe the Steelers are making the right decisions with their young offensive players? Or do you think this coaching staff is holding back the development that could take this team to another level? Picking up exactly where this narrative left off, the deeper we go into the decisions shaping this Steelers season, the clearer it becomes that every choice is part of a bigger internal struggle. One that isn't just about winning games, but about defining the identity of the franchise moving forward. When you really dissect the past few weeks, one pattern stands out. This coaching staff is walking a fine line between maintaining the stability that has defined the Tomlin era and confronting the uncomfortable reality that the league has evolved around them. And that tension is showing up in roster management, game day decisions, and even the way Tomlin communicates at the podium. The clearest example of that ongoing tug-of-war is the Roman Wilson situation. This wasn't a simple case of a rookie losing reps because of performance. This was the coaching staff signaling, intentionally or not, that they value reliability and mistake-free execution over explosive potential. And while that philosophy has carried Pittsburgh through many seasons with competitive records, it's also part of the reason the offense has struggled to reach that next level. You can feel the fan base getting impatient with the idea that experience always outweighs upside. They watched Roman grow, watched him win matchups, watched him show the kind of traits that can open up an offense. But they also watched those traits get overshadowed by the fear of inconsistency. That's what's been eating at fans. Not that Roman needs development, but that development seems to have taken a back seat to caution. Yet Tomlin's explanation, as unsatisfying as it was to many, gives us a window into the coaching mentality right now. Everything is about control. Every rep, every lineup choice, every helmet decision is designed to minimize variables in a season where chaos has hit at every level: injuries, inconsistency, pressure, and expectations. And when a staff feels that weight, they naturally lean on players they trust, even if those players offer less upside. That is the heart of the issue. Tomlin is trying to weather the season using the blueprint that carried him through past challenges, even though this roster, this league, and this moment may require something different. This same push and pull shows up when you look at the injury updates. DK Metcalf pushing through stomach complications serious enough to require an overnight stay in Baltimore shows just how thin the Steelers' margin has become. This offense can't afford to lose him, not with the line in flux, not with the tight end group banged up, not with the run game still seeking consistency. The return of Kyle Duggar matters, but even his presence doesn't erase the challenges of facing an offense as dynamic as Miami's. The concussion cases, the absence of Broderick Jones, and the uncertainty surrounding Andrew Peat all point to a team stretched to its limits. And yet, the expectation is still to win. That's the paradox of the Steelers. This organization carries a standard that, even in difficult years, demands results. Fans don't want to hear excuses. They don't want to hear about protocol timelines or depth charts or option route details. They want to see a team punch above its circumstances the same way Pittsburgh teams of the past always did. That's why Tomlin's future is such a volatile topic right now. The belief in his leadership is still strong in parts of the fan base, but the patience is getting tested. Fans want evolution, not repetition, and they want to see a team that plays to its strengths rather than playing not to lose. That's why the conversation around the Browns is more than just rivalry talk. It's a reminder of how easily a franchise can trap itself with the wrong quarterback, the wrong plan, or the wrong timeline. Pittsburgh has an opportunity in front of them, an opening created by Cleveland's insistence on keeping Deshaun Watson in their plans, by their belief in Shatter Sanders, by their complete misread of their own situation. And that inevitability shapes the context of everything the Steelers do in the months ahead. If the Browns are willing to handcuff themselves to uncertainty, Pittsburgh cannot afford to do the same by delaying its own offensive evolution. So the Steelers now find themselves with a rare opportunity to define the future before the rest of the division forces their hand. The coaching decisions, the roster evaluations, the handling of young talent like Roman Wilson, the urgency placed on this playoff push, all of it is interconnected. This isn't just about whether Pittsburgh can beat Miami. It's about whether the organization is ready to commit to a new era or continue stretching out the old one. And as we move toward the closing stretch of this story, one thing becomes clear. Whatever happens next will say more about the direction of this franchise than anything that has happened in the past 5 years. It's not just a game. It's a turning point. Continuing exactly from the momentum and tone of the last section, the tension surrounding this team only intensifies when you widen the lens and look